Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on the world. Great that you're joining us. We'll give it a minute for people to join. And let's get started. So thank you again for joining us from wherever you are on the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Hans Westerhof. I'm co-founder of Remove. We're a non-profit that supports carbon dioxide removal startups around the world. We try to support them in the journey and try to build flourishing CDR ecosystems. We've been active in Europe, in India, and sub-Saharan Africa up to now. And today's conversation focuses on one of the most dynamic regions that we have encountered in CDR, and that is India. Before we dive in with the panelists that have joined us today, and before I introduce them, a bit of background on CDR. Here during COP, we know that most of the discussions focus around decarbonizing our economies, and rightly so, because the tremendous there, as we all know, is the challenge there is tremendous, as we all know. When we talk about net zero, though, we need to bear in mind that decarbonization is a necessary and the most important piece of the puzzle, but not sufficient. If we talk about net zero, we have to think about the situation where there are still, however limited, greenhouse gases emitted and how we deal with those. We deal with those by removing these emissions from the atmosphere. That is what we call for today carbon dioxide removal. And it is, although currently not very large, a necessary piece of the puzzle for the situation of net zero that we aim to achieve. CDR is nascent, it's emerging. Currently, along the durable pathways, we have removed up to 1 million tons of CO2. But what is daunting and exciting is what it needs to grow into. In order to meet our net zero goals around mid-century, we need to remove 10 gigatons. And that is just an abstract number, but to give you an impression of how large that is larger than the steel industry or the cement industry currently. So the scale-up challenge is enormous. Around the world, we see many entrepreneurs engaging with carbon dioxide removal solutions across various pathways, from nature-based to highly engineered, and developing solutions for verification, monitoring, reporting, and verification. India, with its large talent pool, a growing climate policy ecosystem, and a lot of innovation-driven startups, is starting to play an increasingly important role. We see this firsthand at Remove. We've been active now in India for 1.5 years. We've visited several times, and the ecosystem is really very energetic and buzzing. Today, I'm joined by 4 founders who are at the forefront of this movement. Vikram Vishal, founder and CEO of UrjanovaC, working on a DAC solution, direct air capture solution. Next, we have Siddhant Jayaram, founder and CEO of Equilibrium, a focus on scalable MRV and carbon platforms across various pathways. Then we have Shrey Agarwal, CEO and co-founder of Alt Carbon, innovating with biomass utilization and enhanced weathering. And last but not least, we have Arya Manset, co-founder and CTO of Climitra, working on biochar-based pathways and with various applications and industries. Today, we'll explore some of the lessons these pioneers have learned and how we can collectively accelerate credible, scalable carbon removal. Then if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and if you have time at the end, we'll address a couple of those questions. So let's dive in. And first, to set the stage, I'll ask this question to all of you, and maybe you can answer in 1 or 2 minutes. What inspired you, Vikram, to start a CDR company in India? What does success look like for you? And while you're at it, give us a little bit of background on the solution that you're working on.
Thanks, Hans. My name is Vikram Vishal, and I am the founder and CEO of UrjanovaC Private Limited. And I'm also a professor at the Department of Earth Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, in Mumbai. So what inspired me? So, well, I actually pursued my research in PhD research in carbon capture and storage. And then that's when we realized that for any kind of future emissions that are going to happen, we can possibly capture them and then either utilize or geologically sequester them. But we also realized that we have breathed like close to almost 1.5 degrees centigrade already and 426 part per million that we touched this year in the month of June. So it's evident that we cannot go back to 280 parts per million, which is pre-industrial time CO2 concentration, without removing the CO2 from the atmosphere. So while we cut down in emissions, the legacy carbon dioxide cannot be taken away. And so reducing the temperatures that we are rising is not really possible by doing CCS alone. So that's what motivated me to come up with a solution on CDR. And then when we realized that when we talk largely as looking at the plants which are actually taking up the carbon dioxide, we see the amount of CO2 that needs to be removed is at a scale where planting trees alone will not be sufficient. So we could have possibly artificial trees which can actually remove the carbon dioxide at massive scale. And that's where it motivated us. And so we went ahead, we did some good deal of research with our team and found a solution which we think is innovative and can actually remove the carbon dioxide at scale. So that's what the motivation behind founding and setting up UrjanovaC, which is largely based on capture of carbon dioxide from point sources as well as from the air. So it's a DAG-based startup, as you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram. Before we dive deeper, Sid, what motivated you? And tell us a little bit more on what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, when I moved back to India in 2015, it was what could I do for India, right? Having grown up here but studied in the US, there was an inkling to come back home and do something. I think 2015 was the time where we had a lot of tech startups emerge out of India. Flipkart, Ola, all of these companies saw billion-dollar rounds, right? And billion-dollar valuation rounds. And I was quite curious and piqued by it to see how tech companies have been growing in India, especially in the 2010s. But as COVID hit in 2020, I mean, I spent 5 years in venture capital investing in tech companies in India. But during COVID, kind of we had a lot of time in general. But during that time, you would see the forest fires in California. Closer to home, you would have floods in southern India, in eastern India, just more climate change related events, right? And for me, it struck that this is the generation that's going to see more and more climate related disasters than ever before. And personally felt that the time was right to probably look at solutions that can really help reverse this crisis, right? So spent a year and a half to understand how I could use my skill sets, and carbon finance seemed like a natural fit given I worked in the financial services industry. So honestly came through that problem from a financing lens, and how can we pull together different innovative types of capital. But through the journey, we ended up sort of working with a lot of communities and helping them remove carbon from the atmosphere through nature-based solutions. That's where we started our journey. And I think for me, the drag became how can we contribute and make these communities' lives much, much better, right? So while we started with nature, eventually we figured out that, complementary to what we're doing on the agroforestry side or the regenerative agriculture side, adding layers of more durability and more importantly, solutions that can truly transform the agricultural lands in the country was what kept us going when it came to biochar. In terms of our goals, we definitely want to be a multi-pathway carbon removal company where we try and integrate different kinds of climate resilient solutions for the communities that we work with. And yeah, I mean, end goal is to possibly, hopefully affect at least 10 million communities in an environmental, to help improve their environmental outcomes, their social outcomes, and yeah, most importantly, even their economic outcomes, given we work with smallholder farmers.
Thank you for that, Sid. Thank you. We'll dive deeper in a bit. For now, let's just give an introduction. So Shrey, I had the privilege of visiting you this year. Maybe you can also share maybe a little bit about what you're working on and what motivated you to engage in CDR.
Sure, Hans. Thanks so much for inviting me to this panel. I guess for us, the journey was a bit different. We are fourth generational tea planters, Sparsh and me, Sparsh being my co-founder. And in the pandemic, when we visited one of our tea gardens, which was the heritage Salem Hill Tea Garden, the crown jewel of our family, at that point, we went there to sell it off because the tea garden business was a declining business in terms of its financial crisis. But as luck would have it, we fell in love with the tea garden and wanted to revive it. That's when we took this call that, with my chemistry degree and with Sparsh's international climate law degree, let's put these fancy degrees to some use and try and revive our own tea garden. It started off as that, trying to save our family's heritage tea estates. Slowly, we started speaking to every single company and individual who were in the carbon markets to try and create additional sources of income for our own tea gardens. That's how the journey started for us. And we very soon realized that we wanted to do something that's more science first, that's more removal focused rather than avoidance focused, and that can really help in scaling up the agricultural economy of the country. That was the primary motivating factor for us. We saw forest fires in front of us. We saw the crop yields changing and the soils getting exhausted in front of us, and we wanted to do something about it.
Thanks for sharing that. And again, we'll dive a little bit deeper a bit later. But before we do so, Agyaman, for you, what motivated you to start a CDR startup? Do you hear me, Agyaman?
Can you hear me? Hello? Am I audible?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, as I was saying, I grew up in Uttarakhand, which is an Indian state in the Himalayas, and it's one of the most ecologically fragile regions in India. So, over the past decade, we've seen floods, landslides, cloudbursts, forest fires become almost routine. And these aren't abstract climate projections anymore. They're events which are reshaping communities, villages, townships overnight. So that personal experience is a big part of what pushed me towards climate action. At the same time, I feel that India, with its demographic dividend, technical talent, and ability to build very cost-effective solutions, is well poised to make a significant dent in carbon removal. There are still gaps in supply chain, technology readiness, standards. So for me, this makes it a very intellectually compelling problem to solve. At Climitra, where I'm a founder, we work across both decarbonization as well as carbon removal because, as you mentioned, they're both necessary if we want to meet our climate goals. What we're doing is we're building a vertically integrated
Your connection is not fully stable.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back again.
Okay.
We missed the last 15 seconds.
Okay, yeah, I was saying that CDR in India is still early, and there are a lot of gaps when it comes to technology or supply chain, which makes it a very intellectually compelling problem to solve. And at Climitra, we're working across both decarbonization and carbon removal since we feel they're both necessary if you want to achieve net zero. We're building a vertically integrated biochar ecosystem wherein we're first using remote sensing to detect, map, and quantify various waste biomass sources across the country. And we couple that with advanced pyrolysis systems to convert these waste biomasses into biochar. Now, our biochar where is currently being used for two very distinct applications. One is for carbon removal, which we're all familiar with, and the second, rather interesting application is ultra high grade.
You're dropping again.
Yeah, sorry, where did you lose me?
Yeah, the second application. But maybe you can also, we have time to dive a little bit deeper, Ariaman, but maybe you can wrap up that second application.
Yes, very quickly. So the second application is, ultra high grade biochar for replacing PCI coal as well as pet coke in the steel industry. So instead of being used for CDR, it's used as a fuel, as a biofuel, and it's produced under very specific process conditions. But yeah, I'll pause for now.
Okay, thanks, Ariaman. And now we'll dive a little bit deeper into all of your individual startups, and we'll have maybe 7 or 8 minutes for each of you to have a conversation around this. And I will start with Vikram. Vikram, your technology is, and you mentioned that already in your introduction, can be used in various ways for flue gases and also for direct air capture. And I think, if I'm correct, that you already made quite some strides in the flue gas pathway, right? Decarbonizing heavy industries. Direct air capture is a little bit more in the early days. And as you are well aware, DAC has been heavily invested in the last couple of years. There's many teams working on DAC. Some teams make already great progress. Others face setbacks. And now here is you from India also engaging in DAC. What made you decide to also start a company around direct air capture?
Thanks, Hans. I mean, just to clarify, is it like the 7-8 minutes that you gave us for this question, or there is a series of questions that will come and I need to answer?
Sorry, Vikram?
I just wanted to clarify that you mentioned 7 to 8 minutes for each person will be there throughout. So do I take that time to
No, we'll
answer
stay
this?
5 minutes with you, Vikram. We'll stay 5 to 7 minutes with you. Yeah.
Sure. And there'll be a series of questions, or is this the one question that I need to answer elaborately?
My first question is, DAC has seen a lot of startup innovation already. It's not successful necessarily yet, but there's a lot of teams working on this.
Yes.
And you also engaged there. Why? Isn't it a little bit too late?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now I realize what the question is. I rather think we are very, very timely. When the global north invested in CDR using DAC for almost over a decade, there has been success and challenges as well. But then, that experience is definitely what we are borrowing and learning from what has been done. Having said this, we do understand that the DAC is one of the most expensive ways of removing carbon dioxide. And however, we also understand that it's inevitable that we need to remove carbon dioxide at large scale. DAC, which provides largest, verifiable credits in terms of the quality of CO2 that's captured and removed, in terms of the MRV that is done for measurement, reporting, and verification. Definitely, from the point that it is highly auditable and high integrity carbon removal, it needs a lot more attention and effort in that direction. Secondly, we, as I mentioned, we come from a strong, solid research foundation. And from the research background, we realize that there's a big gap in the scale at which we want to remove carbon dioxide in terms of the intensity of energy that is used in the processes that are there. We do a lot of life cycle analysis with the existing process, and we realize that building a DAC plant also entails a lot of carbon dioxide footprint, right? And then if we also see that the scale cannot be achieved without accelerating these reactions and removing it. If you're just focusing on stoichiometric reactions, it will take its natural course. That's where our innovative technology that we came up with is a biomimetic enzyme-inspired catalytic conversion of carbon dioxide into carbonate and bicarbonate ions. So here, to simply explain that we remove carbon dioxide by accelerating its dissolution in water. The simple example that we give that it's inspired from the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. As we inhale the air, which is 0.04%. But when we exhale the air, which is up to 4%. So 2 orders of magnitude of change happens right in our blood, and that's the enzyme that does the magic. So when we have to convert this, the body can convert millions of molecules of carbon dioxide. Can we do that and replicate that? So what we innovated and patented, and that's what we licensed from IIT Bombay to UrjanovaC, is essentially the catalyst and the solution. So I feel that this kind of a solution is still not there in the world, and that's the big gap that we are trying to fill in. And this work is definitely inspiring more research in this area. Secondly, in terms of again being late or not, I feel the research, unlike, let's say, I should not compare, but just saying some of the technology, rather, fintech, for instance, if you look at the fintech space, the innovation and the AI space that's fast moving, it has happened in a very fast duration, right? But if you understand the innovations in the aspect of CCS and CDR has taken many years to over a decade to come up with these solutions. So deep tech research itself, it takes its own course of time, whereas, there has to be a eureka moment where we come up with a solution which can be scaled up. And many of the innovations are not being able to scale up because of different challenges. So here we find the kind of a sweet spot where the world looks forward to many more CDR, opportunities across diverse technologies. That's where that we have is being proven to be useful. There's a lot of provisions for doing DAC in India, and then kind of gaining from the credits of carbon, from outside of the world, outside of India. And finally, in India itself, we realize that the goal for net zero emissions will also require removal of carbon dioxide at scale, and that can be achieved using this kind of a technology of direct air capture.
Thanks for that. Vikram, you say it takes quite some time for these deep tech technologies to scale. And I think we can agree, right? This is not a matter of 1 year or 2 years, but multiple years. What is the biggest hurdle you need to overcome in order to grow from lab to industrial application?
Yeah. So, sorry. Yeah. So I think there are a series of hurdles that we need to overcome for a technology like this one.
Vikram, you're frozen. Vikram, you're frozen. Maybe we take the opportunity now then to move to Sid, if you allow me, to see if Vikram can get his connection back online.
Yeah, we can go ahead. I'm just a little scared that my internet also shouldn't go at the rate at which it's going today, but go on.
Okay, let's try. So, Sid, you work across various pathways, and one of them is biochar. And biochar has, in my mind, a lot of project characteristics. You need to identify a biomass input stream. You need to pyrolyze that input stream. You produce products depending on your process exactly. You produce the biochar, of course. You produce gas, or you produce oil. You probably produce some credits. And it sounds to me as very much based on serial projects. How do you envision and how do you make this scale more rapidly than linear? What is your thinking there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the formula is how do you modularize each one of these parts of the value chain, right? When it comes to end-to-end biochar creation and utilization, we largely believe there are four big components, right? One is feedstock sourcing. Second is actually converting that feedstock into biochar. Third is the application layer, and what's binding all of this is how do you structure revenue streams around carbon first, and then subsequently through oil in the case of pyrolysis, energy in the case of gasification, and then on the application side itself is can you start to like build out monetization models that are not dependent on carbon alone, right? So the way we've looked at it is how do we how do we break down each of these modules to see what could be technologies or what could be a way to scale them independently, and how do you piece them together, right? So while it might seem like there are serial projects, I think there is a method to the madness that can be built across each of these four modules, and integrating them is almost like putting together a Lego block, right? Like you will have to find a way to make sure that each of these characteristics or modules come together, and yeah, I mean, almost like any other resource that gets utilized, we think that biomass and different types of biomasses can be utilized in an effective manner, right? And over and above that, from an application lens as well, once the char is done, I think, there are different amendments, there are different sort of enrichments that can be used to solve local problems, right? Like just in our case, within the state of Karnataka, which is our home state, right? In the north, the biochar amendment is very different from what we see in the south, largely because what the farmers are growing, the soil conditions, um, uh, the historical crops and the side effects of the chemical fertilizers that have been used in the regions are super different, right? So how do you then build out formulations that make hyper local relevance is something that we spend a lot of time on in terms of what we can offer to the farmer. So the way we look at it, at least today, is we keep the problem statement around what we can do to add value to the communities that we're working with, outside of obviously the carbon removal that gets done through biochar and its application on soil, right? So that's where we think that rather than looking at it as a serial project problem statement, just looking at it as a modularized solution that can plug and play effectively is the way forward. And yeah, I mean, we've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and it's starting to come into fruition this year. We spent a lot of time on the trials, on the production, and yeah, hopefully the world gets to see a lot of it in the coming few months.
Sid, you already discussed a little bit around the product and what you do with that. So your business model, can you do your business model work currently or in the future without carbon finance?
I would love for it to, but unfortunately, I think in the coming future, in the coming years, we will be dependent on carbon finance, right? Largely because I think, the input costs itself are quite expensive. And second is for smallholder farmers to pay for, a 30, how do I say this in dollars, but like probably like a north of a $200 per ton product is not feasible today, right? I mean, we work with, a GDP per capita of sub $500, sub $600 farmers, right? Without the help of carbon finance, I don't think we would be able to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of soil restoration and ensuring like the lands yield better returns, right? Which is why we will continue to be dependent on some amount of carbon finance. With that being said, hopefully, you can never underestimate science. I think if there are ways we can find to either increase concentration or find a way to sort of innovate on more cost efficient formulations, leveraging biochar as the carrier, probably we could be less and less dependent on carbon finance itself. But in the near term, I think there will be some levels of dependency, and hopefully we can stand on those shoulders till we find more economical solutions yielding same outcomes.
Then if we talk about carbon finance, we mean we sell credits, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And no, sure, yeah. And for those buyers of credits, how do they know that a ton is a ton, right? For our industry to scale, we need trust, right? It's of the utmost importance. How do you ensure when you work across various geographies with many, many farmers, how do you ensure trust and verifiability across your processes?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you asked this question, right? I think the good thing about the new wave of technology first climate companies like us, I think Shrey is here, a couple of others, I mean Climitra as well. I think we've taken a technology first approach to solving this problem, right? Which then means that the starting point for us is end-to-end traceability of what we're trying to do, right? That itself, I think, is leapfrogging what existed a decade ago, right? From a biochar application perspective, I mean, just building on top of India's digital public infrastructure, right? I think we have the world's best digital public infrastructure, the world's cheapest digital public infrastructure. We don't need fancy blockchains. We've done that using public rails. So I think most of our MRV systems are built on top of existing infrastructure that can provide traceability related data. So one is on that front, right? Second is obviously from a context and contextuality perspective. I think and this is some of the feedback that we passed on to the registries as well, the CDR registries, that hyper localizing or rather localizing methodologies to smallholder farmers and setting the right checks and balances are going to be needed, because what's CDR for a 100-acre farmer in Europe versus what's CDR for a smallholder farmer in India are two completely different things, right? So how could there be guardrails set in such a way, or system boundaries set in such a way that traceability can be deterministic through maybe, let's say, enriched biochar is one, or some form of radioactive tagging or geotagging is something that we are exploring with them as well. But in general, I think there needs to be some more contextualization. But with that being said, like I don't think this generation of climate companies are too worried about the traceability problem, right? I think that's something that all of us collectively can solve, and it's something that we're actively doing. So I don't think what challenges the carbon markets 1.0 faced on integrity and traceability of trust. I hope that this generation of companies can very truly avoid just because of digital systems. Yeah.
Understood. Now let me take the opportunity to, and Vikram, I will get back to you at the end. Okay, so let me take the opportunity to jump to Shrey. Shrey, you're working on biochar and on enhanced weathering. I know that. Can you briefly explain what enhanced weathering is?
Absolutely, Hans. So, when we think about carbon removal, there are, of course, so many different technologies. Why we selected enhanced rock weathering is because of the unique intersection of agriculture and carbon removal. Now, quickly, I'll tell you what rock weathering is. Whenever any rain falls on rocks and soil weather. Rain has carbon dioxide. It has had carbon dioxide since pre-industrial levels. The carbon dioxide gets removed when the chemical reaction of weathering takes place and gets stored in the soil as bicarbonates, which is a very stable form of storing carbon. This is what over time moves from the soils to the river waters to finally the ocean, where it resides as calcium carbonate, creates corals and seashells. However, weathering takes thousands of years to happen. What we are doing is accelerating the rate of weathering. A very small analogy is that when you put a lollipop in your mouth versus cotton candy dissolves really fast. Why? Because it has high surface area. That's one of the reasons and one of the ways how we accelerate weathering. The other is that you require climatic factors that improve your weathering rates, which means that you require high temperatures, high rainfall, high humidity, all of which exist in the global south, and especially in India and Southeast Asia. And that's why we started our Darjeeling Revival projects, which was focusing on enhanced rock weathering on the foothills of Himalayas, on both the large tea plantations as well as the small paddy farmers. So what we do essentially is we use a silicate volcanic rock called basalts. In India, between the east and the west, you have around 4,000 billion tons of basalts, and they get crushed on a daily basis to meet the needs of the construction industry. Whenever they get crushed, there's some waste that comes out of it, which has very high surface area, very low particle size. That's the waste that we source. we transport it, we finally work with farmers to ensure that the deployments are done as per the protocols that we've set out. And then we do very in-depth soil sampling to understand how the rock has weathered, taking baseline samples, taking samples immediately after it's deployed and at the end of harvest cycles or monsoonal cycles to fingerprint how the rock has weathered and finally how the carbon has been removed, for which we do very in-depth geochemical and geological characterizations. So that's in a gist explaining to you what enhanced rock weathering is.
Thanks, Ray. And you touched already upon it. And this brief explanation tells us what it is, but you also mentioned you spread it on farmers' lands, right? So that brings us to farmers, right? You need to work with them. And in very plain English, what is in it for them?
Absolutely. So I still remember that the first time that I was trying to convince my own family that we should do it in our own tea garden. At that point, I remember that my dad wrote an email to both of us brothers saying that, do you think that I'm mad that I'll allow you to, spread volcanic dust on my farmland? And you're saying that there'll be crop yield increases that I'll see. I've not gotten senile yet. So I think that the first wave of convincing different cohorts of farmlands is the most difficult because they've not seen proof points yet. For us, how it happened was because we were doing the field trials on our own farms and the neighboring farms, it was easier for us to really convince folks around us that this works. And then there's proof in the pudding. So essentially what we go to a particular farmer and say is that you have been applying limestone and dolomite historically, unless and until you've stopped having the financial means to be able to do it. We are going to give you a free soil nutrient, which will not only help in improving your soil pH, it'll improve your crop yield, it'll improve your soil health. At the same time, we also do a lot of different kinds of community activities alongside all of the different farming partners that we work with. So both with the large plantations and the marginal farmers that we work with, we organize football tournaments for them. We organize local festivities for them. We organize health surveys and education surveys for them. And finally, when the crop yield increases, we've seen in rice between 30 to 80% crop yield increase. The first time that number was reported, I actually went on ground to see whether this number is true or not, because it's a huge number. And at that point, I thought that, these farmers are, bloating the number out because they want to get free soil nutrients for the rest of their lives. But it's actually true. In rice, it's very easy to measure crop yield because you simply weigh the harvest. And in tea, we've seen between 12 to 15% of crop yield increases. So the crop yield increase definitely spoke for itself, and there was a lot of word of mouth that spread, which is why within just 6 to 7 months of our pilots, we were able to scale up from 300 acres of our family's tea plantation to 30,000 acres. That's the largest distribution that an agri startup in India has been able to create without working with FPOs. And this year, we've already onboarded another 80,000 acres of land. 80,000 acres is 2.5x the size of San Francisco. And we do believe that Indian agriculture can really have a very substantial impact in terms of solving carbon removal, especially through agri pathways like biochar and enhanced rock weathering.
Thanks, Ray. I have many more questions, but I will just have one now. Also, in your business, you rely on credit sales. Can you elaborate on who those customers are and what your value proposition to them exactly is?
Yeah. So Hans, when we started, there was this conference that Sparsh and I were attending around 2 years back called Carbon and Bound. We were the only two brown-skinned guy in that room. And people were always looking at us and thinking that, can an Indian startup actually do high quality science? And especially for a technology like enhanced rock weathering. And it was actually a very fair concern to have, because India really lacked the agri infrastructure in terms of labs, in terms of scientific talent, or in terms of the operational infrastructure to crack high quality technologies like enhanced rock weathering. So for us, the first thing before we sold any carbon credit was to build a very high quality science team, was to build our own labs. We've built Asia's largest earth sciences lab in Darjeeling. It's called DCAL, Darjeeling Climate Action Lab, and to ensure that all our protocols across transportation, procurement, the science are all very rigorous and at par, if not better than international standards. So I think once we did that, we were able to clear the first few RFPs. So there is the Frontier Coalition led by Stripe. We were the first Indian company to get that. And then we also got the next gen we cleared the RFP for next gen as well, which is by Mitsubishi and South Pole. These are initial purchase orders that are catalytic in nature, where they help you in terms of vetting your science, your operations, give you the initial capital, as well as help in getting recognition in the market. And post that, of course, we've had multiple different clients purchasing from us. So from the Frontier Coalition, we have Stripe, Shopify, Google, Match.com purchasing from us. From NextGen, we have a suite of buyers like BCG, UBS, Fitchway, etc. And since then, we've also made a lot more sales across both technologies. However, one thing that is extremely important, Hans, that we foresee is that there will be very few companies in the world who will actually be able to deliver on their promises. It's easy to preempt, and say that we will remove X tons of carbon, and that MRV is something that we'll figure out. But very few companies will be able to do it at scale or even begin doing it. We do believe that India has the unique opportunity to see this as as a manufacturing sector opportunity where we can do it at the lowest cost at the highest scale and actually build high quality science. In fact, as of last Saturday, Alt Carbon delivered its first verified carbon credits from the Enhanced Weathering Protocol. It was the first credits that Isometric approved in Asia. And I think that really will help us build that trust with buyers.
Congrats with that, Trey, because I know that is a big milestone for any CDR company, right? So thanks for clarifying. I will now jump to Aryaman. Aryaman, you were explaining, I think, how you have two sorts of business models. You work with invasive species and you work with biochar as fuel for heavy industries. So let's stick with the first one right now. We heard Trey elaborating how he works with farmers and what's in it for them. How do you work with local communities around your invasive species biochar approach?
Right. So, for the uninitiated, invasive species are any sort of non-native species introduced to a particular geography, which then turn out to be very successful as a species, often killing off native flora and disturbing local ecosystems. I like to illustrate this with an example. So one of the invasive species we're working with is lantana, which is a flowering shrub, which has wreaked a lot of havoc in my home state of Uttarakhand. So it's single-handedly responsible for most of the forest fires, leading to a great loss of life and property. It's responsible for a lot of downstream ecological problems because it outcompetes native flora. So the local communities, their grazing animals are affected because of this food chain, and it's even causing further downstream effects in terms of tiger populations in Uttarakhand. So it is a well-recognized problem. It's one of the Uttarakhand government's mandate requires them to remove a certain quantity of lantana every year, but they've been unable to do so because of a lack of carbon finance or monetizable opportunity for lantana. So our approach here is to engage the local communities by paying them a certain amount to collect lantana, because again, Uttarakhand is a very hilly region, so large mechanized removal isn't possible. It has to be done manually. So that's one aspect wherein we're engaging with local communities to remove this, and we're also partnering with NGOs as well as the government to replant the lands in which the species is removed. Otherwise, it's very easy for it to grow back. So that's our approach.
So that is a sort of nature restoration sort of approach.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then your second approach is working, producing biochar as fuel for heavy industries, the steel industries. Can you elaborate what's your model there?
Right. So, that's slightly, in terms of the business model, it's slightly simpler than CDR because the biochar is used as a commodity. So it replaces certain very specific kinds of coal used in the steel industry, like PCI coal, pet coke, or met coke. The rationale here is that, every ton of coal which is replaced by a ton of biochar prevents the emissions, that would have been caused by mining, processing, and eventually using that amount of coal. In fact, every ton of coal replaced by biochar saves almost 2.5 tons of CO2 emissions, which is slightly more than the impact that CDR would have in terms of emissions reductions. This is something which is very well known. The steel industry has been on the lookout for biofuels for a while, but engineering the exact specs to replace those specific kinds of coal is where our niche is, because unlike CDR, we need very, very high quality biochar here, and which is produced consistently across batches, even if there are variabilities in the feedstock which is available. So, engineering the pyrolysis machinery in a way that delivers consistent outputs is, where our niche is. And we've done this at a lab scale. We've expanded to a pilot scale. Our samples have been validated by 3 of India's largest 5 steel players. And we're currently in the process of setting up a full-scale commercial facility.
I would envision this being 2 different business models, really, right?
Absolutely.
Are they somehow related, or are you building 2 businesses in parallel?
So, in terms of the use cases of the product, which is biochar, are different. And of course, the properties are also different. CDR allows for a wider range of feedstocks, whereas industrial applications require very specific feedstocks with high lignin, high cellulose, etc. In terms of our resources, I think the waste biomass mapping, which we're doing using remote sensing and ML, is very useful for both businesses, because it helps us optimize supply chains, plan logistics, get a sense of where we can do what, because unlike in CDR for steel, proximity to the client also becomes another factor. So I may have a biomass which can give me steel grade biochar in a particular geography, but if there are no steel plants nearby, then CDR is my best option. So there are there are synergies, but of course they're 2 very distinct use cases. It's either used for CDR or for industrial application.
Thank you for that. And let me now go back to Vikram. I also see people in the chat. If you have questions, if we have time for 1 or 2 questions, but please post them in the chat so we can read them. We won't do live Q&A. There won't be time for that. Vikram, I think we were stuck at the point where I asked you, a direct air capture startup, deep tech technology takes a long time to scale. What do you need in terms of support in order to go there?
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Hans. I'm very sorry for jumping out because of the internet issue, it seems. Thanks for your understanding. So we were talking about the hurdles. So of course, as I mentioned, the startups, the technologies that are there, they need time for incubation and being, moving from the lower TRL to higher TRL for such technologies. And definitely when there's something more disruptive and innovative, there are a lot more questions as well, which need to be answered. And therefore, an acceleration has its own challenges. However, when the technology has promise, it sees the light of the day, and also it moves faster than otherwise. So from that point, I think UrjanovaC particularly has been receiving a lot of support from different industries to first cut down their emissions, but also remove and offset the carbon dioxide emissions by removing carbon dioxide using direct air capture. So from that point, the technology validation is very much right there. And the second part is that we are actually not just capturing carbon dioxide, but also producing very high quality pulverized calcium carbonate, precipitated calcium carbonate. So if you look at that, India still imports a good percentage of PCC, and the cost of PCC is very high. And therefore, when we capture CO2 and convert it to a useful product like PCC, it also generates revenue from that side. But if we make a product like methanol, ethanol, or something that burns, eventually releases the carbon dioxide, here we put them as carbonates, which can actually be put in building materials, and the CO2 is never released, right? So the fate of carbon dioxide is into permanent removal. And that's where we are able to accrue maximum amount of credits also for such an activity. So now you are very well aware that in collaboration with Remove and with VP Capital support, we have got the RFP for the first sort of sale of carbon credit from DAC in India. And I think that's a big milestone. So the support that's coming is very, very highly valued. And without that, it's difficult to move by, because from the Indian perspectives, it's not really the case because we don't really have policies or mechanisms by which there is support or incentives for doing CDR or that per se from the Indian government side yet. In fact, just to share that I represent the government of India at the IPCC, and when 2 weeks ago when we were at Peru, there was so much debate on the methodologies for verifying the CDR, and finally, fortunately, there is acceptance for the methodology report for scoping and calculation of credits from the CDR using different technologies. That stands out because it's the quality of credits and the auditable sort of credits is very high, and that's where we are banking on, because even if the value is high for the credits, the certainty of removal is very high. So it's not to be something that does not, it's a green light signal for doing like that. So this I see as an opportunity, despite the hurdles that are there initially, or rather everywhere. But as we progress, this is expected to scale up from a few million tons right now in the world to a billion tons, right? So there's a big gap, and that's where we see the big opportunity for technology like ours, where we did the techno-economic analysis, and when we look at the product and then the market demand for that product and then the capture cost, there is a payback period as well, which is not really heard of in tax systems.
So for you, in your business model, what's the importance of carbon finance versus other sources of revenue that you can access?
Yeah, so carbon finance is definitely, since it's there out there in whether it's the voluntary carbon market or involuntary carbon market. But the point is that, as I mentioned, the quality of credits being very high, there's demand for it. But what we lack is a complete life cycle analysis in terms of going from scope 1 to 3, respect of setting up the plant itself, right? So it's something we have to equate that. Second is that what is the fate of captured carbon dioxide? Let's say when we make this carbonated water, essentially by using industrial wastewater or seawater, if it's located to a nearby region where basalts are present, then we don't really have to put two pumps, one that sends water, other one which sends carbon dioxide. Is the carbonated water with high quantity of carbon dioxide goes down and reacts with these basalts in the underground and converts them to carbonates very easily. Third, the DAC location, there's no point source where we have to go to the industry and locate it. It can be located onshore, offshore, wherever we see that we can move this. So that is a major benefit for co-locating, with respect to the storage side, geological storage side for this kind of DAC plus CO2 storage. And if it is the process that we mentioned is for the industries as well. So in the industrial case also, this system can be placed something that is there. So carbon financing is important, is required. But I think over time, the industries will have to evolve a model whereby with limited such support, we should be able to still operate this. I always say that companies can make a little less profit, but a lot more sustainable for the future.
Thank you for that. I'm having my eye on the clock, and I see, in fact, in the chat, one question as far as I can see it, and I think that's one for you, Shrey. How does enhanced rock weathering survive as a business in long term? Because here it says, as any town produces stone powder for soil enrichment, available almost free.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll take the first half of the question first. I think enhanced weathering as a business, when you think to the operations, it sounds ultra easy. In fact, there are multiple people in India who are trying to do it, and we hope that all of them are able to. And however, the difficulty lies in every single step of the supply chain, right from which basalts do you want to procure, to how would you like to transport it so that your emissions don't bloat up, to how you would like to deploy it, to finally doing the soil sampling. Where should you collect your soil samples from? To finally doing the analysis. There are very few ICPs that exist in India in functional circumstance, and very few PhDs who even know how to run an ICP. So across every single part of the supply chain, there are lots of different challenges that one has to really overcome to be able to make the cut for getting your carbon credits. Once you've done that, post that, if you're able to still keep your cost curves lower, then it's a huge market. But getting all of these different criteria fulfilled and all these different boxes ticked is extremely difficult. Long term, we do foresee that we will be going into offsetting, insetting alongside offsetting. We do foresee a world where the number of samples that we collect will be lower. And in terms of the basaltic reserves that exist in India, there are enough reserves to be able to help us reach half a gigaton scale, if not more, across India and South Asia. So I think in terms of feedstock, we're not really constrained. So it is just a matter of being able to do high quality science and climate finance.
Thank you. And I do not see more questions in the chat. So then I will revert back to you as panelists and with a closing question. And please try to keep your answers into more or less a minute. We're having this panel in the context of COP. What would your message or your ask be for the policymakers attending COP? What would it be? What would help you move CDR forward? And who wants to go first? Sid, can I ask you?
Yeah, no, happy to take this. I think from policymakers, what we would love for is clarity, right? I think what the biggest challenge in the market today is how is the demand side clarity going to evolve, right? For CDR, everyone knows that there has to be a bridge between the voluntary and the compliance markets, but how do we get that bridge between the voluntary and compliance markets to give the clarity that's required for project developers to continue to scale their projects is going to be super critical in the next sort of half a decade or so, right? I think demand, if there's clarity, there's going to be more innovative ways of financing that's also going to come for projects, right? Similar to what happened with renewable energy or clean transportation, where there were different kinds of financing that came through. So for the new wave of CDR companies as well, if there's demand certainty that can be baked in, right? I think more and more financial institutions will come, and that's what's going to actually trigger the non-linear pools of capital that is needed for CDR to scale in the next decade or so. So in one line, yeah, I mean, demand side clarity from policymakers.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to be brief, but I want to give all of you an opportunity. Ariaman, to the COP policymakers, you have one shot.
Yes. So, what Sid mentioned, clarity is essential. And I think taking more initiative towards CDR in a time-bound manner, because, say the Indian carbon market is also expected to launch sometime this year, but it's already been stretching for too long. And then, they have all of these events wherein they're trying to, discuss ways of linking with, say, the Japanese carbon market, but there's no actionable step which they're taking towards. So it's a lot of meetings, a lot of conferences, but very little actionable steps which policymakers are taking. To conclude, I think they already know what is to be done. It's not rocket science, it's not quantum physics. They just need to do it, very simply.
Okay, thank you for that. Shrey, also for you, a message to the policymakers.
Absolutely. I think technologies like biochar, enhanced rock weathering, DAC, and whichever technology India can really showcase their strengths on, they need to be really very well drafted in Article 6 and across different joint crediting mechanisms that India creates for different countries. I think once that's done, in terms of the supply also, there'll be a lot more folks coming up within India in terms of both project developers and financing opportunities that can really help scale the market. We do feel that it's a supply constrained market at the moment.
Thank you, Shrey. And last but not least, Vikram, your shout out
Thank
to
you.
the policymakers.
Yeah, I think like the time for this panel session is ticking, the clock is ticking the same with the world. Global clock is also ticking for 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now the policies in different scenarios are seeing that 2.8 degrees is something that would become inevitable unless massive investments and policy implementations are done. And then when we announce the policies, there is a gap between the ambition versus implementation. So I think more action on the ground is very much needed for seeing that. And the final thing is that, of course, there's something on the global north which has happened before, but global south is still working. So working together with the communities and knowledge sharing, technology transfer for accelerated deployment of CDR technologies is somewhat, I think, inevitable, and we should move a little fast on that. So the policies must align with these, the global target of mitigating carbon dioxide. while we talk a lot on adaptation, mitigation and removal is very, very crucial. And so more action is needed on this than otherwise.
Okay, well, then we hope they listen in, right? And they take this to heart. Thank you for joining us, guests here, panelists. Thank you for being here and working on CDR. I wish you all a good rest of the day. I hope for a successful COP. You can follow all of these founders and their individual startups on their LinkedIn pages or their websites. And you can follow Remove also on the Remove LinkedIn page. Thank you again and have a wonderful rest of the day. That brings us to the end of this session.
Thanks, Hans. Thanks, everyone else. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.